Fatheads, welcome to an episode of Sharing Our Pairings. This is episode 19, American Whiskey, or Bourbon as we like to call it. Today we're going to go over a couple different whiskeys, American whiskeys, talk about the origins. I'm your host, John the Cigar Surgeon, as always with my co-host, Robbie Rass. Rob, what's going on, brother?
Surgeon, what's happening, man? I'm I'm ready to get into some of these whiskeys. We've got some, or bourbons, whatever. I don't even know the difference. Is there a difference?
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into that, I'm sure. Because you're prepared. I'm just here. But no, I'm excited. We're smoking some DeCrossier cigars. We'll get into that a little bit more too. So this will be a fun show.
Yeah, I think so. I'm of course coming off the tail end of a herf. I was out the other night. We're kind of cheating and recording early because I'm a big baby and don't like to be cold. Also, I don't like my cigars to split. But I'm coming off of a herf. I think I smoked something like 6 or 7 cigars. I had to actually stop myself because I was like, I'm not going to have a palate for the show if I continue to smoke. And one of the things, and this is not a paid sponsorship, although it should be, I tend to carry around with me stuff called it's a mouthwash called Smart Mouth. And I know a lot of people complain about cigar breath, or significant others complain about cigar breath. Smart Mouth is it's a 2-part thing. So you mix two of these liquids together, and then you use it as a mouthwash. And honestly, it's been tested by my significant other, proven by my significant other to eliminate cigar mouth, and I think more importantly, get your palate back. Very, very important, I think, at night, but super important first thing in the morning because I tend to have just awful cigar breath in the morning, especially if I've been out to a herf.
You know, I've I've heard of a lot of different things, and I've tried a few different things, and I haven't found anything that works.
Fair enough.
But I haven't tried the one that you're talking. What was the name of it again?
It's called Smart Mouth. I typically pick it up from the Wally Mart, and it's like, I don't know what it'd be in American dollars, but I think it's like $12 or $13 here. Lasts a fairly long time because I only use it for cigar smoking. But honestly, I brush my teeth, I brush my tongue. Nothing can get rid of a cigar mouth like Smart Mouth for me.
Interesting. Anyways. I'll have to check that out. That was really sounded like a commercial.
I know, right? Yeah, but like honest. If we had an honest customer, actual customer, actual testimonial.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I've used lots of different stuff. Not like even normal mouthwashes. Nothing can touch cigar breath like Smart Mouth. So, yeah, Smart Mouth. If you want to sponsor us, please contact us at cigarfederation.com.
Yeah, jump in whenever you can. Exactly.
So we're smoking some Crossiers today.
Yeah. We've had. Sorry, I was looking up some stuff on one of my bourbons. DeCrossier, we had Santana on Cigar Chat. I think you actually sat in for me on that episode, so I didn't get a chance to chat with him. But I've had a few opportunities to talk to him offline. Great guy, really interesting blends. Not your typical blow you up in the face kind of blends that for that modern palate that we've been seeing a lot of over the last few years. Much more delicate style, in my opinion. Elegant blends, lots of depth of flavor. Medium strength style. I'm smoking the Diplomacy series. Some specs on that one. I got to pull up the website here. I've got it pulled up already. At least I think I do.
Well, while you're doing that, I'll be a good host and Phil here. And I think elegant. I'm smoking the DeCrossier Alfort. This is the Genios, and I think they placed pretty high on our list. It's either number 5 or number 6 for the year. I think it's unusual as we've got 5 guys doing reviews to find a consensus for different palates, and I think one of the impressive things is that right across the board everyone was blown away with Santana's stuff, and I like your use of the word elegant. I think that's an excellent way to describe his blends.
Yeah, there's just the depth of flavor there, and it's the kind of cigar that if you're smoking it and you're hanging out with your buddies and you're BSing or whatever, and you're not really focused on it, you're still going to enjoy it. But if you sit down and you really are focused on the cigar, and that's kind of the focal point of what's happening for you, it takes it to a different level. The same thing for me with Mr. Sam. I feel like that from La Polina, that cigar has those types of characteristics where it's got enough flavor and strength to keep up with whatever you're doing, but if you really sit down and pay attention to it, you really get a lot more out of it. With the The Diplomacy series, Ecuadorian wrapper, Costa Rican binder, fillers from Costa Rica and the Dominican. So you'll notice that there are no Nicaraguan tobaccos in there. I'm not exactly sure where his stuff is made, to be honest.
I believe it's actually rolled in Costa Rica.
Is that right?
Yes, because I was looking up the El Forte, which is Costa Rican wrapper, Costa Rican binder, but he's got, or pardon me, the binder on the El Forte is a secret. He actually says it's a secret, it's not revealed. I do actually have a Nicaraguan and Dominican filler in, along with Costa Rican filler in this one. So it tends to have a little bit more of that Nicaraguan pepper, a little bit earthy, a little bit of leather mixed in, but balanced, and again, very nicely balanced against, with that Dominican and Costa Rican filler, I think.
Yeah, I was hoping to smoke the La Forte with you. I actually didn't have one. I was looking for a golden blend, which I think was his new release this year. I didn't have one of those that I could find either. I know I've got some, but I just couldn't find them. But I did have the Diplomacy series pulled out, Diplomacy series, and I'm smoking it, and it's got that delicate, elegant flavors on the palate. I'm a little bit concerned that these bourbons are going to run over it, but I'm only, about half an inch, not even, into this thing. So I'm sure the flavors are going to pick up here in a minute.
So before we kick off talking about the bourbons we have, what's the difference between bourbon? What's the difference between whiskey? Whiskey really just describes a lot of liquors that are distilled, and whiskey is a pretty broad term. Scotch is whiskey, bourbon is whiskey, rye is whiskey. It's really just talking about a distillation of a spirit. Bourbon, to be qualified as a bourbon, and this is for those bourbon head, what is a bourbon? Why is it called a bourbon? Well, first of all, it's an American product. It's proudly American. It's been produced in the United States. It has to be produced in the United States to be called a bourbon. It has to be made of at least 51% corn. So every distillate spirit is made from one particular grain. If it's rye, obviously it's rye whiskey. If it's barley, then it's going to be Scotch whiskey or just Irish whiskey or any other kind of whiskey. But for bourbon, it has to be 51% corn. Also has to be aged in new charred oak barrels for a minimum of 2 years. You can call, I think you can age it for less, but then it's just called new make spirit, so it can't be classified as a bourbon. Distilled to no more than 160 proof, so proof is really a U.S. term. For Canada, or for the rest of the world, it's alcohol by volume. So alcohol by volume in this case is 80%, which is quite high. And then when you age it, it has to be aged at no more than 125 proof, which is 62.5% alcohol by volume, and that's quite high, and that's going to come down, especially as the alcohol ages. You're going to see the ABV come down, and then finally, when it's bottled, it has to be bottled at 80 minimum 80 proof, which is 40% alcohol. So that, there's quite a few things there, and there's actually a little bit more, but I've been kind of running my mouth for 2 minutes here, and I'll give you a chance to speak.
No, that's good. I mean, when it comes to that stuff, you always do all the research. One thing that we noticed, we always try to do a little bit of research when we're getting prepared for these shows, and I've got 4 different bourbons here, and pulling up the websites and all that information that you're looking for, the percentages of what's being used and things of that nature. All that information, for the most part, is available on these websites. So if you're really looking for that kind of thing, you can definitely find it out there. I'm just going to jump right into my first one since I've got it here. I'm going to start with Eagle Rare 10-year. It's a bottle there. I hadn't actually seen Eagle Rare around too much until like the last year, so I don't know how long it's been around, or maybe it was just it's new to California. And I'm actually trying to see where it is, where it's distilled, which company distills it. Little info here on the website, just some kind of superficial stuff. It's Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. It's matured or masterfully handcrafted, carefully aged for no less than 10 years. Rareness of the great blend, blah, blah, blah. Tasting notes, it's kind of interesting to give you some tasting notes. The nose is going to give you complex aromas of toffee, hints of orange peel, herbs, honey, leather, and oak, which that's just a lot going on there.
That is a lot.
The taste is bold, dry, oaky flavors with notes of candied almonds and rich cocoa with a dry and lingering finish. And while you get into your first one, I'm going to try to figure out where this is distilled at.
All right. Well, my first. Let's see what do I got here. I've got a Zackariah Harris bourbon. This is actually from a company called Sazerac, and Sazerac actually, as you can see, I got a little budget bottle when I was down in Florida because, quite frankly, the booze cost for you guys is insanely low compared to what we pay. So I think I picked this up for something like $2 or $3, which to me is just absolutely mind-boggling. I noticed when I was looking up the information on this, a lot of people mentioned this is an excellent choice for budget bourbon, and I think we're kind of a little bit talking today about budget bourbon. You know, we're not looking to blow people out with a super age statement, highfalutin bourbon. We're looking for sort of good old American bourbon. It's affordable, which is nice about bourbon. There's lots of different companies out there. You know, they look at it. It's kind of got that nice gold and amber color to it. The Zackariah Harris is actually made by the company, the parent company. Sazerac owns Buffalo Trace, Old Rip Van Winkle, A. Smith Bowman, and Great Bourbon, which are all fairly big brands in their own right. The distillery itself is called the Glenmore Distillery, and this particular bourbon is sort of marketed as a budget brand.
It was funny, keeping this topical. Eagle Rare, also owned by Sazerac. They acquired Eagle Rare from Seagram in March of '89. Sazerac's Kentucky distillery was then known as the George T. Stagg Distillery. Today it's Buffalo Trace, so it's made from Buffalo Trace. And Eagle Rare was created by master distiller Charles L. Beam in 1975. So it's been around longer than I have, by a couple of years. But I get some wicked sun coming in. Let's go back. So yeah, there's some topical stuff there because it's owned by the same parent company. Comes out of the Buffalo Trace Distillery. Just a little click of the mouse here. There's a lot of stuff coming out of Buffalo Trace. See if I can look at some of these. We've got, wow, there's a ton. Blanton's are some of the bigger names. Blanton's, George T. Stagg, that's what you're drinking, right? Mm-hmm. Some other stuff here, that Van Winkle, yeah, all the stuff that you mentioned too. So there's a lot of stuff coming out of the Buffalo Trace Distillery. So yeah, so cool. I'm going to get into this first one here and see how this pair works out.
So I've taken a couple sips of mine as you're taking some sips of yours, and I think what's interesting is it's definitely a bourbon, right? And so you're getting that sort of sweet, syrupy bourbon taste to it, but it does have a little bit more complexity than I would expect out of a budget brand. There's sort of an oaky finish to it. Like I definitely get a lot more of that woody quality to it than I was expecting out of a budget bourbon. So it's interesting. I certainly need to take a couple more sips, I think, to acclimate my palate.
Yeah, that's why you need to take a few more sips. I think we're on the same path here. Eagle Rare in my neck of the woods for regular size bottle, 45% alcohol by volume, 90 proof. It's about $22, so a little bit more than like Jack, but not much. Jack Daniels. Kind of along the same lines of the flavor notes that you're getting. The pairing with the cigar brings out a lot of sweetness in the bourbon for sure. Kind of a syrupy, sweet note at the front, like you were saying, almost like a toasted caramel note in there. Yep. Oaky notes in there as well. I think these two bourbons are very, very similar. I actually did a blind little taste test thing just at home. I had my wife pour all four of these bourbons. I'd like to say it was in preparation for the show, but it was just because it was a Saturday night. But I was just curious because, we'll get into some of these other ones that Booker's and Basil Hayden's are two others that I'm going to be tasting later. And those are two of my favorites, and I get real excited whenever I find those at a good price or, I have them in the house because I really do enjoy those. And I was just curious, if I'm tasting these and I don't know which one is which, am I really going to be able to pull out those flavors and decide that, a bottle of Booker's really is worth 3 times a bottle of Eagle Rare? And the Eagle Rare was the one that Eagle Rare and Bulleit for me, which Bulleit is the second one that I'll be tasting. Very, very similar. They're very similar on the palate, on the tongue, on the flavors. They're very similar in price range. So I would imagine that when you stay in that price range, you're going to get a lot of stuff that's pretty similar.
We'll talk a little bit more about some of the other bourbons we have here in a minute. You're listening to Sharing Our Pairings, episode 19. Presumably you're listening to this on New Year's Eve, although I can't imagine many of you are. If you are, we certainly appreciate you tuning in, especially being New Year's Eve. We want you to urge you to drink responsibly. What a great night to drink better and drink less. Be safe out there as we welcome in the new year. I'm your host, John Cigar Surgeon, coming to you from Cigar Federation. If you're listening to our podcast, thanks very much for tuning in. If you're listening to us from our YouTube, thanks very much for subscribing. I'm here with my co-host, Robbie Rass, and we're enjoying some great American whiskey.
Yeah, this as you go into your transition there, this Eagle Rare, I really do enjoy it, and it's one of those things where I mention, I picked up a bottle of Eagle Rare. People will comment like, "Oh, that's one of my favorites. It's good stuff." They've also got a 17-year. This is a 10-year.
Wow.
The 17-year, I've never actually looked for it, but the bottle's nice looking. So there are a couple of different options from Eagle Rare. I mean, for budget, I want to say budget, but more attainable bourbons, your everyday type stuff. This is one of my favorites, and this pairing is real nice. It's not blowing the cigar out. I think that it's overrunning the cigar a little bit, but not too much. I mean, they're complementing each other in a way where it feels kind of right to be smoking this particular cigar and pairing it with some bourbon, regardless of what the bourbon is. It has kind of that celebratory kind of feel to it.
And I think we talked a little bit about on our last episode when we were sort of trying to strategize a little bit about what cigar we're going to drink, or what cigar we're going to smoke with the bourbon. DeCrossier was at the high point of that list, and I think because it is an elegant cigar, it's not a bold in your face cigar, and I think what we're looking for is something that was quite balanced, something that was nuanced with a bourbon, because it's very, very easy for bourbon to overrun a cigar, and I think it's very, very easy for a cigar to overrun a bourbon, and this is perhaps one of the more difficult pairings. And I'm kind of in the same boat. I did actually need to acclimate my palate because I think it's a little burned out from last night, but I wouldn't necessarily say the Zackariah Harris that I'm drinking is complementing it so much as they're sort of going hand in hand, sort of down a path. That is, neither one is running over the other. Together they're pretty good. The bourbon doesn't really take anything away from the cigar, but doesn't necessarily really add anything, and that might sound as maybe a negative thing. But honestly, it's enjoyable. Like, I could see myself, especially because we're recording on a Sunday, sitting down with a DeCrossier, a nice bourbon like this. Now, normally I would have ice, but since I'm in sort of temporary digs, I don't have any ice. And just watching a football game or a baseball game, and just relaxing and enjoying myself and not thinking too much.
Those are the best times. We don't have to think too much. As I'm getting further into this DeCrossier, I'm getting a bit more spice on the nose, on the retro hail. The flavors are really starting to take a step forward, which is standing up a little bit. The cigar is puffing out its chest a little bit to the bourbon, really kind of leveling the playing field, really. So I'm kind of excited to see how this is going to go moving forward. I mean, for me, pairing's fine. I think the cigar highlights things, and in this case, I'm okay with that. Normally if I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have, a special cigar, I'm going to drink some special bourbon, and no offense to Eagle Rare, it's not a special type bourbon. I mean, I can sip on the Eagle Rare, but I'm okay mixing it too. Some of the stuff I'm going to get into later, I'm not going to mix with anything. I'm just drinking it straight. So from that standpoint, I'm enjoying it, but it's not the best, but it's not the worst.
Yeah, and I think we're on the same page here. It's enjoyable, but we're not setting any new records for pairings here. One of the things you mentioned beforehand was that I think you said it was a 10-year age statement, and that's actually pretty impressive for a bourbon. Typically the bourbons you'll see on the shelf, if they have an age statement, it'll be 4 years or 6 years is pretty typical. So you have to think that the distillery is sitting on the spirit for 10 years. They're not making any money off that spirit. 10 years is a long time to not be making money off of stuff you've invested in raw ingredients and labor costs. So it is, pretty impressive if you have a big enough distillery that can put out a 10-year bourbon and still be really, really affordable.
Yeah, it sounded like the Buffalo Trace distillery that this is coming out of. They're doing okay.
Yeah,
they've got some pretty serious product there, so they can afford to have this Eagle Rare sit there for 10 years and still have it affordable. But you're right, and that's kind of a good segue into my next bourbon, Bulleit bourbon. Frontier whiskey is what it's called. And I'm sure
that sounds really American, doesn't it?
It does. I'm sure there's a reasoning behind that. But this is actually, oh man, I was just reading it, and it's not aged as long. It's God, I want to say it was 5 years, or no less than 5 years. The bottle that I've got here, lost my video feed for whatever reason. There we are. Larger bottle. This is at the Rasmussen household. This is our well bourbon, if you will. So we tend to pick up a bottle like this at Costco for about $35, I think, and this is 1.75 liters. So it's a good sized bottle. Yeah, Frontier whiskey. And I know there was a reason that it could be called Kentucky bourbon. But it's Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, but they just call it Frontier whiskey to be just to be fun. It's made small batch techniques inspired by those pioneered by Augustus Bulleit over 150 years ago.
Augustus.
Yeah, he gets after it. It's Bulleit bourbon has a bold and spicy character with a finish that's distinctly clean and smooth. Amber in color with gentle spiciness, sweet oak aromas. Mid palate is smooth with tones of maple, oak, and nutmeg. The finish is long, dry, and satiny. Wow.
Satiny.
I wanted to say salty, but that didn't make any sense. Satiny with a light toffee flavor. And there's a little bit of hyperbole in there, but that's pretty spot on from what I've experienced. It's definitely got some sweeter notes to it. It's 90 proof. So here we go with those percentages: 68% corn, 28% rye, and 4% malted barley.
Interesting.
Wow, I haven't even had that much to drink, and I'm already stuttering through my words. It's a Diageo brand, and I know you had mentioned Diageo before. Okay, yeah, it's aged at least 6 years, so it is. It's definitely younger, and it is. It's produced at the Kieran Brewing Company, Four Roses Distillery in Lawrence, Kentucky.
So now, two things just to touch on, because you mentioned what does it have to be considered a Kentucky bourbon. Well, simply enough, just produced within the Kentucky bourbon region. So it does have to be produced within Kentucky. The other thing, talking about the age statement, you might hear 6 year, 4 year, 8 year. What does that mean? Well, that's not the median age. It's not the maximum age. Believe it or not, it's just the minimum age of a whiskey of a bourbon that's in that blend. So you might actually have a 15-year, a 20-year, whatever year bourbon, but the minimum age year bourbon that they use in there, just again to keep everyone, I think, above board, so that they're not, perhaps using 99% 4-year and 1% 15-year, and then calling it a 15-year bourbon. The way that, and this is certainly true in the Scotch whiskey industry as well, you have to put the minimum age statement on there. Does that mean that there's not some old stuff in there? No, not necessarily. There could be some really, really aged stuff in there, but the industry, to keep them honest, has a minimum age statement.
No, that's good to know. I actually always kind of wondered about that, and it would stand to reason that if they say the minimum age here is 6 years, that the bulk of that whiskey, or the bulk of the whiskey that's in the bottle, is going to be, aged right around that time. I don't imagine there's too much 20-year-old stuff making its way into this bottle, but you never know. But I do like the idea of, like you said, it's not 98% 6-year and 2% 15-year, and they're calling it a 15-year. I like that aspect of it. I mean, as you can see, very similar in color. This is to the Eagle Rare. The Eagle Rare is a little bit watered down at this point, but the and the nose on it is actually kind of citrusy, and I think that's got something to do with the fact that that I've got the cigar going. It's bringing out some citrus notes in there, which wouldn't be prevalent, I don't think.
Yeah, so I'm also onto my my second bourbon here. This is a Tom Sims, again, one of my bottles that I picked up while I was down in Orlando. As you can see, this is a 6-year. It is coming in a little bit higher than the Zackariah. This is 43% or 86 proof, so it's a little bit more of a heater. And I can tell right away, just nosing it, we are talking about obviously a more expensive, more complex bourbon. And I mean, even off the nose, you talk about citrusy. Well, I'm getting like orange peel, and just the nose gives it away that it's a much more complex bourbon than the Zackariah Harris, and that it makes sense because Zackariah Harris is intended to be a budget bourbon and maybe something you'd use maybe for mixing some old fashions or some of the old classic cocktails that we've had on our shows in the past.
Yeah, and now that I've taken a few sips of the Bulleit, a little bit more bold up front than the Eagle Rare, but it still has that. There's a little bit of spice. It's got that sweetness on the finish. For me, I mean, there's a reason that it's like I said, it's our well, if you will, our well bourbon, and we buy it in the big bottles because it's good. I mean, it's dynamic in the sense that I can sit here and I can sip it, and I can make cocktails out of it where I'm not gonna feel bad because it's so expensive, and it makes it a damn good old-fashioned, damn good Manhattan as well. That's the one that I like to blend with. I know that when we did when we did our classic cocktail show in the past, I blended almost exclusively with Bulleit and then the rye. Won't talk about the rye because we're not talking about that today, but before it gets a little bit watered down, the flavors are strong for the cigar, running over it a little bit, but the pairing is nice because after I take the sip, let my palate rest for a second, take a puff on the cigar, they really do stand their own. There's not a whole lot of melding.
Maybe?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of melding of flavors. They're a little bit distinct. I feel like the Eagle Rare was a little bit smoother of a comparison between the two, a smoother combination, I should say. But this is just a little bit more fun for me because the bourbon does have a nicer, stronger flavor to it.
And interestingly enough, I'm finding with this Tom Sims that I think as I sort of get into a more refined bourbon, even though it's stronger, I would definitely classify this as a smoother drink. Again, still got that rich amber color to it. This is a very, very easy sipping bourbon. I mean, the flavors, no question, it's more complex. Again, that shouldn't be a surprise. The first one is a budget whiskey. It's intended to be a budget whiskey. It's not supposed to blow you away with intense, complex flavors. As we evolve our what we're tasting here, as we move up our line of bourbon, this is an easy pairing for me. Definitely getting a little bit more of the pepper out of the Crossier with this, of the El Forte, with this bourbon, but in a nice way. It's not bringing out pepper that's really overpowering my palate, but maybe bringing out a little bit more of those nuanced flavors that I wasn't otherwise tasting. And the bourbon is not saturating my palate, so my palate isn't just getting blown away, which is really nice.
Yeah, as I get a little bit deeper into this pairing, take a few more sips, a few more puffs, the bourbon is highlighted on the tongue. Flavors of the bourbon are highlighted on the tongue, and the cigar is highlighted in the retrohale. Yeah. And so in that sense, it really does become a bit more linear. I mean, I take that sip, I get that flavor in my mouth, I take the puff, I retrohale, 60, 70, 80% of it, because this isn't a strong cigar that's going to blow you away. I can do that. It really does make for a nice pairing. I mean, this to me kind of has, a nice maybe late fall evening sitting outside and it's not too cold yet, and it's a bit romantic, but taking that sip and really enjoying the bourbon and enjoying the cigar equally. they really do kind of highlight each other. The more that I get into it, I know I'm contradicting what I said earlier, but the retrohale on the Diplomacy series here is definitely picking up, and I feel like that really does balance it out nicely.
Well, and I think to support what you're saying, your palate does need to adjust a little bit when you're drinking. I mean, one of the things I notice a lot when I'm doing whiskey tasting, your palate does take a little, 3, 4, or 5 sips and maybe 10 minutes to really get acclimated to what it's tasting. So you can come back to a bourbon 10 minutes later and get a whole level of flavors you weren't getting previously. And I think you hit the nail on the head that this is not something I'd be drinking in the summertime, because in the summertime I might be looking for something a little bit more light, a little bit more citrusy, not that thick syrupy mouthfeel that I'm getting from a bourbon. But even though it's wintertime here, I'm in a semi-okay warm environment right now, and this is great. Like I honestly can sit here all afternoon, watch football, sip bourbon, smoke a DeCrossier, and even after going to a pretty big herf last night, I'm actually doing great. I'm really enjoying this pairing. This is probably for me one of the better pairings I think we've done.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. This is, although I could do this in the middle of summer too. I could. I like my brown liquor. I don't really care what time of year it is. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's a really nice. It's just a really nice pairing. The cigar has its merits. The bourbon has its merits, and they play together nicely. I really am enjoying it. I'm looking forward to moving on to the next two that I've got here, but I don't know. This is pretty damn good.
I think we've got a consensus. You're listening to Sharing Our Pairings, episode 19, American Whiskey or Bourbon. Thanks very much for tuning in. If you're tuning in on New Year's Eve, thanks very much. We appreciate your audience. Appreciate the podcasters out there, the podcast listeners. We try to give a little love to you guys because we do appreciate you listening to our show, even though you may not be watching the video. As one of our guests said earlier in the week, maybe I've got a face for radio instead of a face for video, but we'll roll with it. We do say drink better, drink less, especially on New Year's Eve. I think that message really needs to hit home. If you are drinking tonight, please don't drive. There's lots of alternative options out there. Please utilize one and be responsible. Nothing you want on New Year's Eve like something bad happening to you or someone else. If you're interested in sponsoring our show, Rob and I do fund this show out of our own pockets for the most part. Certainly when it comes to what we're pairing with. If you're interested in contacting us for sponsorship, you can contact Logan at cigarfederation.com, Rob at cigarfederation.com, or John at cigarfederation.com. And as Rob mentioned last week, if you have any suggestions for pairings or you want to be on the show, we're not highfalutin guys. We'd be happy to have you on the show, talk a little bit about what we're doing that week. Please contact us. Appreciate it.
Well said. Yeah, cab rides are cheap, man. Take a cab. You're drinking, take a cab. So much cheaper. So I'm going to move on to what I'm dealing with next here. One of my all-time personal favorites. Basil Hayden's. Kentucky Straight Bourbon. And, I feel like with the amount of Basil Hayden's that I've purchased in the past and consumed in the past, I should know more about it. But I really don't. I mean, this comes out of, let's see, it is, what, did I ever figure out what?
Yeah, that's out of Jim Beam.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Jim Beam, yeah. Exactly. So this is part of their small batch series, which is Knob Creek, Basil Hayden's, Booker's, and Baker's. I've had all of those. I haven't had Baker's, I don't think. Basil Hayden's, it's an 8-year minimum aged, 80 proof. So it's 40% alcohol by volume, which is a little bit less than the previous two that I was trying. Golden amber in color. This is all coming from their website, and you can see it's. I mean, the color on this is actually maybe a little bit lighter than the Bulleit, and a little bit lighter than the Eagle Rare. The nose is really sweet, and a little bit floral. There's some just sweet, like what is it when you the sugar water? Why can't I think of what it is? A simple syrup, sweet like simple syrup. If you've ever just made, I mean, I make simple syrup at home all the time. To mix in with cocktails. If you've never made simple syrup, it's equal parts sugar and water. You bring it to a boil, you let it simmer for 5 minutes, and that's it. And it just becomes like a nice, just a plain sweet syrup. But it really does have notes of that. There's some floral notes on there, and a little bit of orange peel. And I think that's citrus that we're going to find that pretty much on all of these, just based on my experience. Go through some more of the tasting notes here. The aroma, spice, tea with a hint of peppermint. I didn't get any peppermint on here. The tea, those tea notes are probably the floral notes that I was talking about. Taste, it's got spicy, peppery, honey, light-bodied, gentle bite with a dry, clean, and brief finish. They recommend that you pair this with some ginger ale. I think that's a little bit blasphemous. I'm not going to pair Basil Hayden's really with anything, and maybe I'm overstating the quality of it. Maybe I have it on a bit of a pedestal, but this is probably the first. It's not even a highfalutin bottle. I think it's like $42 for a bottle, which is probably more than most folks want to spend, but it's not a lot of money by any means. But I'm not going to pair this with anything. If I'm drinking it, I'm drinking it straight. And I usually don't even put too many ice cubes in there. Maybe one, maybe two, depending on how much I'm having. But it's definitely lighter, sweeter. I don't get a ton of spice off it, like they were saying on the website. But one of my favorites, and I'll get into it a little bit more, after I take a few sips here. But you go ahead and talk about yours, and I'll get into mine here.
So along the same distillery route from Jim Beam, I am actually going with a Knob Creek as my number 3 for a couple different reasons, which I'll get into in a minute. So this is a small batch, 9-year. This is really, I think, geared towards people who are looking for a little bit more of a premium bourbon, willing to pay a little bit more. This is 50% alcohol, so quite a bit more than some of the other bourbons we've been drinking. I had this before. I mean, the whole reason I own this bottle, as you can see, it's a larger bottle, is because it's delicious bourbon. It does come out of Jim Beam. Jim Beam is friggin' huge. Oh, sorry. Gosh, I think I just messed up. No, it's Jim Beam. It is Jim Beam. See, it's so hard keeping it straight because there's so many of these bourbon companies, and you look under the parent company, and you have to sort of follow it all the way back. In this case, Jim Beam, and Jim Beam just has an enormous amount of distilleries or products that they put out. So you're drinking one, I'm also drinking one, and I mean Jim Beam goes back to 1795, believe it or not, founded by Jacob Beam out of came over to the United States from Germany, and presumably one of the first people to ever use a charred barrel to make bourbons apparently was Reverend Elijah Craig. I like this bourbon. So, as I sort of nose it here, I mean, right away you can tell you're dealing with a far more complex spirit than some of the other bourbons we've been having so far. I mean, you get a lot of I think I'm getting a lot of what you were talking about with that sweet simple syrups. There's some maltiness to it. I mean, immediately the nose is telling me that I need to take a sip of this, so I'll let you talk a little bit while I testament with my palate here.
Yeah, you got to get into that. This, Basil Hayden's it's just really good. It's when I think of a bourbon, I think of a couple of different styles of bourbon. I think it's a lighter, sweeter bourbon. And you know what? I've actually, and I will admit, I've made some mint juleps with this in the past. That's really the only thing I've made with it. And mint julep is really just bourbon, mint, and some simple syrup. But when I use Basil Hayden's, I don't put any simple syrup in there. So I just add mint to it. So I don't know if that really makes it a mint julep or not, but for me, it has kind of the same effect. Not quite as sweet as if I'm using something and I'm adding some simple syrup to it. But the flavors on this are just, and I hate to keep saying that things are light and delicate and elegant and beautiful and fairy dust, but it's just, I don't know how else to explain it. It's got a really light flavor to it, and I introduced my neighbor to it, and he likes his bourbon, and this has become his favorite. And one of the things that he likes about it is it's only 80 proof, so it's 40% alcohol. So you can have a few of these. You can sit down with your buddies. You're sitting down at home or wherever, and you can have a few, and you're not going to get tanked off of it because it doesn't have quite as much alcohol. And I never really thought about it from that standpoint, but I can have 2 or 3 of these if I'm hanging out with some friends and wake up and feel fine in the morning. I'd still be taking a cab home, but that's just me because I'm really, really, really anal about that. I don't. If I even look at some bourbon, I'm taking a cab home because I'm such a big. I just don't. It's not worth it for me.
Safety first.
Yeah, exactly. But just the pairing here is really, really nice. It's an elegant cigar. It's an elegant bourbon, and there's that sweetness in there. There's a little bit of spice that I'm picking up more so now than I have in the past, and I'm sure that's the cigar that's bringing that out. It's definitely highlighting the spice of the cigar on the retrohale. It does become a little bit more full-bodied in the sense that there's a bit more spice than I anticipated, but it's taking that Bulleit pairing that I really liked and just kicking it up a notch. There's that sweetness up front with the bourbon and the spice on the finish. It brings out the spice in the cigar. Really, really nice. Nice for, again, a nice brisk fall evening. I think we're a little bit late for some of this stuff, or maybe even an early spring evening, but there's just something there. There's some earthiness to it. There's a little bit of spice in there, and I just really enjoy the way that the two profiles meld together.
And I think you and I are probably on the same page in terms of the type of bourbon we're enjoying at this point, because I would almost mirror word for word what you've said, where this is definitely a more fuller-bodied bourbon. But still, if I was drinking a 50% whiskey, a Scotch whiskey, I would have to water this down, no question, because my palate and my nasal passages would just be getting blown out from the alcohol. But I can sit and enjoy this, and as you can see, my pour is what I would consider normal for me. It's a nice light pour. I get a lot of pepper off of this for the finish, so it's got a long peppery finish. And interestingly enough, this El Forte, which does have the Nicaraguan filler in it, you'd expect with that Nicaraguan filler to get a lot of like a spice bomb. Believe it or not, with the retrohale, it actually calms down the bourbon. As I do a retrohale, I get a lot of toasted notes. Your favorite descriptor, it's very creamy, very smooth,
yeah, maybe.
very creamy, very velvety and smooth. And it, honestly, I think the El Forte and this Knob Creek is an absolute bourbon match made in heaven. This might actually be ranking as one of my best enjoyable pairings for the year. It's just fantastic together, I think.
Yeah, I've had some of that the Knob Creek that you're sipping on. They come out of the same distillery.
Yeah.
They're different in the sense that I think the Knob Creek is a bit more full-bodied. It's going to have a bit more spice, if memory serves. I haven't had it in a while. It's not quite as sweet as the Basil Hayden's. But I think your cigar is a bit different than mine. Yeah. They're almost different in the same way. The bourbons are different in the same way that the cigars are different, because your cigar is going to have a bit more of a kick to it. But I can see where that pairing would work well, because I have smoked that cigar and I have had that bourbon, and I can see a nice couple in there. But definitely with this Basil Hayden's, for me, it's just, when you say smooth, it's one of the smoothest bourbons I've ever had. And to say that that's not the boldest statement in the world, because I've sipped on some bourbons here and there, and I've tasted some stuff, but I haven't gotten into some of the real high-end stuff. Your Van Winkles or whatever. That's all beyond me at this point. But I know, I can almost say for a fact that I know this is going to be my favorite pairing, because when I move on to the Bookers, it's significantly stronger. So I'm curious to see how that's going to work out.
Yeah, at this point, I think I'm almost regretting the fact that I need to move on to my next pairing, because honestly, this is probably the highlight pairing of the day. You would think that I chose the Knob Creek in this cigar sort of intentionally, but I didn't really do any research in terms of the flavor profiles to make sure they matched up. It's very fortuitous that they did match up in a very, very excellent way. So if you have a chance to try out Knob Creek with an El Forte from DeCrossier, I would recommend it. I think you're really going to enjoy the way these two come together to complement a pairing session. Absolutely, hands down, fantastic.
Yeah, on that note, I'm going to jump into my next one because I know we're coming up on some time here. So my the next choice that I had here, Booker's, and this comes out of the same distillery, which was Jim Beam, correct?
Yep, that's right.
It's part of the small batch bourbon collection, along with Knob Creek and Basil Hayden's. So the Booker's is 6 to 8 years, much stronger. It's 121 to 127 proof. So, and the cool thing about this, and I'd noticed this before, and I don't know how well you guys can see that, but they've got a sticker like this on each bottle. So this one is aged 7 years, 5 months. They've got a batch number. It's batch number C2014-05. 63.95% alcohol by volume, so it's 127.9. And they do that for each bottle. So for every bottle, it's going to be a little bit different. The age is going to be a little bit different. The alcohol by volume is going to be a little bit different. But they give you all that information that you can see right here. I want to read the label to you, but it's in kind of a handwriting that's kind of hard to read, to be honest. But some notes from their website. I'll pull this up here. Tasting notes. It's a deep, rich, smoky amber color. And let me pour it real quick so you guys can see that. It's definitely darker. Oh, hello.
While you're pouring, I might just throw in a couple comments that,
yeah, go ahead.
Drinking at 63.5%. I mean, that's 63.5% that's a heater.
Yeah.
There's a very good chance that you're. Well, in fact, my strong recommendation would be you're going to want to add water or a generous portion of ice to that, because 63.5 could just blow your palate right out of the water and be tough to taste some stuff after that.
Yeah, one thing that I've gotten accustomed to doing is just putting a splash of water in just about everything that I'm drinking. I don't know what it is about. I got the sun coming out. I'm getting washed out here. Just a little bit of water in there tends to open up the flavoring a ton. So that's kind of a nice thing. Going back to some of the notes here from the website. So yeah, as you can see, it's going to be kind of hard to tell because it's a little bit washed out. This is significantly darker than the previous three that I've been sipping on here. Deep, rich, smoky amber color. Aroma has big oak, vanilla, and smoky charcoal. And it's funny, I can smell that charcoal. It's got a big, smoky, earthy vibe to it. Almost like if you're jumping into a cigar that's got a lot of Lajero in there.
Lajero.
Show us your Lajero. It's almost got that same type of feel to it. The taste, intense fruit, tannin, and tobacco, oddly enough.
Interesting.
The finish is clean, long, and intense. They use intense in here a lot. So it's going to have some much bigger flavors. I don't know if it's going to be quite as complex as some of the others, but it's definitely going to be more bold. The Booker's, the first time that I had it, it was too strong for me. My wife, she'll occasionally come home with a bottle of this or a bottle of that, and she always says that it's for me, but she ends up drinking just as much of it as I do. But I remember when she brought this home, and I tasted it, I was like, wow, this is really, really strong. And it took me a little while to get used to it. But once you get kind of used to it and get accustomed to that strength of flavor, it's just really, really good. Again, not something that I'm going to mix with too many different things. There's some interesting cocktails that I've had where it's been mixed in there. When I was out in Chicago, we went to a bar, kind of like a speakeasy type place, and I got this cocktail, and I can't remember what it was called, but they used tobacco bitters in it, which I thought was really, really interesting. And it was Booker's Bourbon that was in there, and it was a big, bold, dirty, earthy cocktail, and I really, really enjoyed it with some orange peel in there. It was really, really nice. So maybe in mixing it in something like that, and you're going to get real creative with what you're doing. I mean, I don't even know how you make tobacco bitters, but one thing that my wife had done, she found this recipe online, not really a recipe, but a way to make smoked ice chips, where we basically put put water and some wood chips on the barbecue in like a little in a little wood smoker, and you just kind of let that water boil for a little while, and then you freeze it. And the ice, you break off the little ice chips, and they've got a real smoky flavor to them. Adding something like that to this is a really, really cool way to enjoy that. I've only done that a handful of times, but it's definitely an interesting vibe. And I'm the same way with wine. I like old world, earthy, dirty, deep type flavors, and which is a little bit different than what I like in cigars. But something like that is really it hits my palate in a nice way. But I'm going to get into this. And what's your fourth bourbon there?
So I kind of held off. Originally, this was supposed to be my third bourbon, but it's a bit of an odd one. It's a Red Stag Black Cherry. Now, this is a flavored bourbon. This does have an artificial flavor. It's not a natural flavor, and they have to specify that on the bottle. And you might be thinking, Surgeon, what the heck are you doing? Yeah, why are you drinking this flavored bourbon? And I'm sure I can get a label for being a bit of a liquor snob or a beer snob. I actually had the opportunity to taste this at one of my local liquor stores that I frequent quite often, Willow Park Wines and Spirits. And one of the Jim Beam representatives, this is a Jim Beam bourbon, was there handing out samples, and he said, I got a black cherry bourbon, and I thought, that's not really my wheelhouse, but again, ever to be the one to try something new, I said, you know what, that's fine, I'll try a little bit. The worst case scenario is I don't like it, I don't buy it, I've lost nothing. And what I actually found was it's actually quite good. Very smooth. It's absolutely not a complex bottle in any way, shape, or form. You can see by the color, it's perhaps a little bit lighter than some of the other bourbons. The nice thing I think about this, the reason why I keep coming back to it, is the cherry does not overpower. It's not a cherry bomb. I know a lot of people are maybe sensitive to the black cherry flavor, so you do get a cherry finish to it, and it's a nice smooth cherry through the middle, but you don't get that huge black cherry finish to it, which I think I find extremely off-putting. I drink it, I enjoy it. The girlfriend absolutely loves this, and this is sort of a mainstay in our bourbon cabinet, as it were. I don't know if this is necessarily the best pairing choice. Because it is a flavored bourbon, you're losing a lot of the nuanced characters of the bourbon. You're really not looking for something complex here. Then this is probably not a good pairing. I'm trying to sort of rack my brain here to think of a cigar that I would pair with this, and quite honestly, I think I would have a really tough time pairing a cigar. But I think I wanted to highlight this because it is a relatively expensive bourbon from Jim Beam, but it's enjoyable. Like, this is I think if you have a chance to try it out at a sampling and don't have to pay for the entire bottle, it might be worthwhile to give it a shot.
Yeah, that's something that I've seen. I've seen it around, and I think Red Stag actually has, a few different flavored bourbons, if memory serves. But I could be confusing it.
No, absolutely.
That's one of the things that they have at my local Bevmo in some of the small tasting bottles, I believe. And I've always seen them, and I thought, maybe I'll give it a try someday, maybe not. But after your recommendation, if the next time I'm there, if I see a bottle, a couple bottles of those in the small sample size, like the kinds you get on airplanes, I don't know how much is in there, but that might be something that I check out and give it a shot. Going back to this Booker's, I've kind of let my ice melt in here, and I've kind of done that intentionally. But right off the bat, the flavors are much, much stronger. Big, earthy notes. There's a lot of wood, a lot of oak in there. I'm not tasting that charcoal, which is good because I don't want to taste it. Having it on the nose is one thing, but having it settle on your tongue is another. The pairing here is not really quite the best because it's definitely running over the cigar. Something like this. I would want to pair a cigar that's got a little more behind it. Some things that we've smoked in the past, like the Tennessee Waltz from Jericho, or from Jericho Hill, from Crowned Heads. That might be a nice pairing, or even that My Fatherly Bijou, something that's got a little bit of pepper to it, a little bit of spice, or maybe not a little bit, like a fair amount of pepper and spice to it that can stand up to this. This might be something that I would want to pair with the Buckingham. I don't know if you've had a chance to smoke that Buckingham yet, John, but that thing's got some teeth to it too. So a pairing like that, maybe this one it runs over the cigar a little bit, which is unfortunate because this is a really good cigar. The bourbon's really good, but they're very different.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to have a chance to try that Buckingham, I think, in the next few weeks, hopefully, and maybe we can find a time to fit that cigar in with some of the other pairings you're doing down the road. Just to get back to this Red Stag for a second, again, really enjoyable on its own. Definitely not what you want to pair with the DeCrossier, that syrupy sweetness to it. Really runs over a lot of that nuanced and elegant flavors of the DeCrossier, as you put it. So not a win in my book. Absolutely, if you haven't been listening to the show up until now, it's pretty obvious that the Knob Creek, the 9-year, absolutely fantastic. This is a huge win. Probably one of my favorite pairings of the year that we've done so far. Just absolutely great match to do the DeCrossier with the Knob Creek. I would absolutely do this pairing again and recommend if you have the chance to try it yourself.
One thing that I am getting out of this Booker's with the pairing here is an interesting fruity sweetness that settles right in the middle of my tongue, almost on the finish, and it's a unique flavor that I haven't experienced in Booker's before, and I've had enough of it to know that this is a little bit of a tweak on the flavor, and I mean I can only guess that it's coming out because I'm pairing it with the cigar and the way that it's working on my palate. It's coming around, and I think. And I keep contradicting myself because I think I'm giving my initial opinions a little too early. And like you said, it does take some time for your palate to transfer on to what you're working on. It's coming around, and maybe it's just because I've got a little bit more alcohol in my system. Maybe it's because I want it to pair better than it was before. It's nowhere near the pairing that Basil Hayden's is. Basil Hayden's is kind of a perfect pairing, and I think I would have even said that before we started the show. That there's that sweetness in there, there's the mild spice that's going to go well with this cigar. The pairings for all these have been fine. Pairing it with the Bulleit was good because Bulleit's got a little extra sweetness in it. That Basil Hayden's is a little bit sweeter. So one thing I guess that I'm taking from this episode is that if you're going with a cigar that's a bit more balanced, that's got a little bit of a spice on the retrohale, but it's not overly sweet, it's not overly earthy, it's a nice balanced smoke. Maybe something on the bourbon side that's maybe a little bit lighter, it's got some sweetness to it, is going to pair nicely. If you're going with a cigar that's got more teeth to it, that's got some strength, some pepper, a little bit more Ligero in there, then a bigger, bolder Booker's. I always go for alliteration whenever I can. Something like the Booker's, it's got that more depth of flavor, more depth of strength to it. It seems almost really simple. I mean, if you're going with a cigar that's not quite that strong, go with a bourbon that's going to have more lighter notes and some more sweetness to it. It seems to make a ton of sense.
So as we head into the new year here, January 7th, we've got we're going back to a beer because I think for the show we find that beer pairings tend to be pretty popular. We enjoy them. They're fairly reasonable in terms of affordability. We're going to go a little bit more affordability with our January 7th Sharing Our Pairings episode 20 already, if you can believe that. We're going to go with some budget beer. Probably find a budget cigar to pair with that. Thinking there was kind of, it's the new year, you've blown your wad for Christmas. Maybe you don't want to be going out and spending a lot of money on some really, really nice small batch beers. So we're gonna try and find some hopefully good beers, but also beers that come in on a really good budget, and talk a little bit about that. Again, that's going to be our follow-up show, which is January 7th, Wednesday as always. You're listening to Sharing Our Pairings. This is episode 19.
So when you're talking about budget beer, how budget are we talking?
Well, and that's a good question, because I think when you talk about beers, there's a price range, and I'm not a snob per se when it comes to beer and liquor, but I'm not drinking generic beer. I'm not drinking light, cheap, watered-down beer. I just won't do it. Yeah.
That's a little too budget for me.
It's a little too budget. So I think what we're going to try and do is find something, not necessarily on sale, but something that comes in, like we're talking about Rogues last week for our Rogue show. Rogue's a great beer, but it's also got a price tag attached to it. And we're going to try and find something, and it might be putting myself out on a wire here, on a limb, something. I'm drinking too much bourbon. We're going to try and come in maybe around the $2 a bottle mark if we can, something really affordable, but not in the $1 range where you're talking like just, beer that's really made to hit a budget. And there's nothing wrong with that, but, if you want to really do a pairing, you're not going to be doing it with a Miller Lite. You're not going to be doing it with just a generic cheap beer. We still want to get some decent flavor out of it, and it might be one of the more challenging shows we have to do because, a lot of these beers that we're going to be picking up, we've probably never had before.
Yeah, I'm kind of racking my brain right now to come up with a few that fit in that price range, and I mean the one that I keep coming back to in my head is just like a regular Sam Adams, and you can usually pick up, at least in my neck of the woods, a 12-pack of Sam Adams for maybe $10, and that's pretty good, right? So I think that something like that falls into that category. And there's even some more interesting stuff that I've seen that, going back to our holiday episode, the Ill-Tempered Gnome out of Oakshire Brewing, for that large 22-ounce bottle was only $3.99 or $3.50 or something like that. I picked up another bottle because I liked it so much. So there is stuff out there to find in that budget. I know we're kind of waxing on about the show that we're going to be doing in the future, but yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, it is going to be kind of interesting. That one's going to take some. I think it's going to take some legwork to find some budget stuff that's going to satisfy your budget, but it's also going to satisfy your palate. So yeah, I just came up with that, by the way. Just gems, just popping off gems.
Just dropping knowledge bombs.
Yeah.
And this is why you're the co-host. I mean, you just, you're always thinking.
Mm-hmm. That's not true, but
no, not at all.
So I think that kind of wraps us up. I mean, it wraps us up for the year. I've had a lot of fun doing the show. John, spending time with you and kind of going down the road of different pairings with some bourbons, and I definitely want to get it a little bit more into Scotch because I mean, really, I love Scotch, and I've never really paired Scotch with any cigars. I mean, unless I know I think we did a Scotch show. Did we do a Scotch show?
We did. We did a couple Scotch shows, but kind of like some of the earlier bourbon pairings we did, we didn't really necessarily focus on one particular Scotch, one style of Scotch. Really, we're trying to broaden our horizons, and certainly horizons of some of our listeners, to maybe try some stuff they haven't had before, and just kind of hit a wide market. And I think what we'll try to do in 2015 is maybe, as we've done with the Rogue show, as we're doing a little bit with the Bourbon show, drill down a little bit and focus on stuff that's specific. And you think about, this show, we talked about it. This show actually was something we had discussed for quite a while in 2014 before we made it a reality. I think you've said it, I've certainly said it, that this is a fun show. We don't want to get too cerebral on you. We're just here to have fun, to try different stuff. Some stuff's not going to work, some stuff's going to work brilliantly, like it certainly has with the bourbon today, I think. But really for 2015, we're going to try and keep it fresh, bring you guys something new, keep coming on with interesting stuff to challenge you. We're going to certainly continue to have guests on, special guests where possible, and we're going to have some regular folk. We're going to try and get some of our audience on the show, and just keep it loose, because I think at the end of the day, that's what we're all about here on Sharing Our Pairings.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. Well, everybody have a happy New Year, and everybody be safe. And I'm looking forward to the budget beer show now. That's a challenge. A challenge accepted. To find some interesting stuff, and we'll have to figure out what we're going to pair with that too. Maybe I don't know. Thinking of a budget cigar, I can't really think of anything. Some of those Rocky Patels that you were always talking about, 1990s and the 92s, which I don't even know if I've ever smoked those, or not in the last few years anyway. Something like that, or you know what? Even like Tatuaje Tattoo. Illusione Rothschild. Those are some pretty good budget cigars as well. So, anyway, moving on. So, Happy New Year, and I'll catch you guys all next year.
Thanks again to our listeners for tuning in to sharing our pairings, and we'll have some more pairings for you in the 2015 season. As we've said consistently, drink better, drink less. Again, stay safe out there, make responsible decisions for New Year's. Thanks very much.